How can you build your self-discipline and not only rely on willpower in order to achieve your goals? What's the difference between willpower and self-discipline? And what does it really take to be a disciplined person? Having worked with many different clients and seen in multiple industries, I know what it takes to build the self-discipline you need in order to achieve your goals, both in your business and in your personal life. First of all, what's the difference between willpower and self-discipline? Willpower is the ability to resist short-term temptations in order to reach certain goals, but it's on the moment, whereas self-discipline is the ability to consistently and continuously have some practices in place that enable you to take actions to reach your goals, aligned with your future goals and your future self. The difference between willpower and self-discipline is that willpower is something you use on the moment, whether it's to resist eating that cake or to force yourself to go to the gym or to take action and do that call, whereas self-discipline is the ability to have those practices in place continuously. For instance, going every single day to the gym or eating a healthy diet consistently and continuously. Why is it that we don't want to rely just on willpower and that instead we want to shift towards self-discipline? Willpower is something we all need in different moments. If someone shouts at you on the street, you need your willpower to maybe stay composed and calm and answer politely. So this is something that we always need, but we don't want to rely on willpower for all our daily habits, whether it's exercising or doing certain activities in your work, or resisting the urge to get frustrated or annoyed when things don't work out. We want these to be a little more of a habit and a behavioral pattern. And this is where self-discipline comes into play. Self-discipline is built by you continuously taking these actions and building these behaviors. The way you build this self-discipline is, first of all, you start small. It is so tempting when you're a high achiever, and this is a mistake that I've made so many times in the past, which is to set the bar so high and to define your standard based on your best ideal day. When you're super in the mood, really excited, you've slept well, you're feeling great, you're energized, it's the 1st of January and you're building new habits, then you decide that your new standard will be to go every day for an hour to the gym. That is not the way to set your standard, because then all the other days where you're not at the top of your game and you're more tired or more stressed, suddenly it will feel impossible to actually do that. It isn't impossible, but it will feel that way. Instead, we want to aim for something that, yes, is a bit challenging, maybe a bit out of our comfort zone, but it's possible. And so we start small. I remember in the past when I wanted to build my exercise routine, I used to always think that I had to do an hour a day. I would keep it going for a week or two, and then I would fall through. And then at one point, I just shifted this dynamic to a minimum of 20 minutes a day. And it could be 20-minute running or Pilates or workout. And now it's been 8 months and I've done this every single day, including day where I had fever, including days where I was traveling and getting up early. Every single day I've fitted in 20 minutes of either form of yoga or Pilates or run or workout. And some days it's more, but I've set the base standard. So we want to start small, and maybe 20 minutes is already a lot. Maybe start with 10 minutes or 5 minutes. This wasn't my first attempt when I started to exercise every single day. It's already been several years of working out. So maybe when we're just beginning, want it to be 10 minutes a day or 10 minutes every 2 days. And so that's the first sort of principle, is to begin very small. And then that's your base standard. And then, of course, you can do more than that. So on certain days, I work out half an hour or an hour, but it's not the base standard. So the consistency is a lot more important than the intensity. And as high achievers, high performers, we tend to glorify the intensity, the hard, like working all night. But it's a lot better to work consistently on really important things in your business than it is once or twice to suddenly do an all-nighter. That generally doesn't really help the business to move forward. It really is those actions that you do every single day, even though that can sound sort of boring. That is generally what all the high performers will say, which is this is what actually makes you progress, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life. So we're looking here at starting small. And then the second rule is never skip 2 days. So when you're building a new habit, and self-discipline really is based upon habits and principles and standards, when you're building a new habit, you can skip 1 day, it can happen, right? We can be sick, something can happen, there can be an emergency. But if you possibly can, never skip 2 days. And the reason I started exercising every single day and not just 4 or 5 times a week was because it was easier for me to exercise every day and to have some days where it's a really light stretch versus to exercise 4 or 5 times and they take 2 days off, because it would sort of break my habit. And so this helped me to build my own self-discipline, my habits, and my self-trust by maintaining this. So we start small and we don't skip 2 days twice in a row. And the next point here that's really fundamental is that self-discipline directly correlates with self-trust. Think of it this way. If you had an appointment with a friend and you suddenly cancel with this friend, giving no reason, no excuse, and you just didn't show up, how much does this friend then trust you? How much do you corrode that trust just by not showing up once randomly at a meeting? Now, I mentioned you did that 2-3 times. How often or how much do you think your friend would still like to see you? Now, if we look at this in terms of self-trust, it's the same. If you say to yourself that you're going to exercise, or you're going to do that hard work task, or you're going to finally shift your diet, or you're going to go to bed early, and you don't do it, once corrodes trust, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 100 times, and suddenly you don't trust yourself to follow through with anything. In the past, when I was working on this, it brings back memories of constant deception and constant disappointment when I felt that I wasn't following through. I would tell myself, this time I'll wake up early in the morning. This was a long struggle of mine to get up earlier in the morning, and then I wouldn't. And then I wouldn't again. And then I wouldn't again. And what happens is afterwards, you don't believe yourself that it's even possible. So you've totally corroded your self-trust. And this makes us a lot less self-disciplined, because if you don't trust yourself to do that action that you've told yourself 100 times you will do, then how can you start over again? Because you don't believe that it's possible. So how can we break this? It's a matter of really looking at it from a clean slate and be like, the past is the past. From this new perspective, you start small and the commitment needs to be 100% there. Because the truth is, willpower is hard because you're pushing through resistance. It's a short-term effort. It's a limited resources. Self-discipline is easy as you build it, because you get these new rules, these new principles, these new standards, and these are just decisions that you've made ahead of time, and it means that it's a no-brainer when the moment comes. So if you've decided you just don't drink alcohol, then it's very easy, because after a while, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, when people offer you alcohol, it's just, you don't need to think about it. It's an instant reaction. No, I don't drink. And it could be the same with sugar. So I quit alcohol and sugar years ago, and it's very easy because I don't even think about it. If dessert happens to arrive when I'm in a restaurant with friends or hotel, I just say, no, I'm not really into sweet things, and I just don't go there. That's very easy because you don't need to make a decision. But the reason people think that self-discipline is hard is they haven't fully committed. If you think, I want to quit sugar a bit or diminish a bit how much sugar I eat, or if you think, I want to be a bit more proactive in my work and do maybe sometimes the hardest task first thing in the morning, or be a little more focused, there isn't a full commitment. It's not a full decision. If you decide that's it, you're not drinking a drop of alcohol, that's a really strong, clear commitment. And when you make that really clear commitment, it's easy. Maybe the first few times it's not. So self-discipline is something that's easier as you go along. So now it requires no willpower, no effort for me whatsoever, not to drink alcohol, not to eat sugar. They're all just sort of in my DNA, my way of being, because it's an automated process. This means I've got more willpower left for other things. And exercise now is pretty automatic also. And now maybe it still requires willpower to get motivated sometimes, but it's a short amount, because then the self-discipline kicks in and it's just, oh, this is what I do. And then it's also aligned with the identity of who you are. If you are someone who values their health and eats healthily, if you're someone who gets up early and exercises, if you're someone who's proactive in their work and takes responsibility and ownership and accountability, all these things are images of how you see yourself. And then if your habits are aligned with that new identity of yourself, then it's also easier, because you're just not the sort of person who would blame circumstances for the problems. You're not the sort of person who will show up late. You're someone who shows up on time or early. You're not the sort of person who's just going to binge eat. You define yourself as someone who isn't the person taking all of those actions, or who is the person taking all these positive actions. when we look at it from this perspective, you can see how it becomes easier because these decisions are automated. You don't need to think about it again. You've made this rule, you've made this standard for yourself that this is something you will do or not do. And then decision is done, decision is made. And sometimes you might need to remind yourself, depending on what it is, but mostly it just becomes automated. It's only difficult at the beginning. So when you're shifting from someone who eats cake twice a day to never eating sugar again, of course, that initial phase, probably for a few months, is going to be difficult because most likely there's a bit of a sugar addiction and there are a lot of habits associated with eating sugar, maybe around different times of day or people that you see or in the office. So the initial phase will be hard and the initial phase requires that willpower. But after a while, it's just a rule that you've decided, a standard, a principle that you've committed to, and you don't need to ask yourself the question. That's why self-discipline does become easy, because you no longer have analysis paralysis, decision-making, going back and forth, you're not sure about it, maybe. And that's why it's also a lot easier to totally stop something than to diminish. I remember when I first wanted to quit alcohol, I was around 23, and there was some peer pressure in a work situation. And they sort of said, but you can drink, you still drink. And I said, well, I don't really drink much, or I don't drink a lot. And then pretty much I ended up, having a drink because of the peer pressure in the group. And it wasn't a clear no. And I remember thinking, I didn't really want that drink. Why did I do that? And it was because it wasn't a clear no. It was just, I'm diminishing, I'm quitting, maybe less. But afterwards, a year or so later, so 24, when I quit alcohol, then it was just very clear. If someone would try and peer pressure me into it or ask why I didn't drink, it was very easy because I'd made that decision, that commitment. And so it was just a no-brainer. It was just no. And that is a lot easier. So if there are things in your life that you do want to totally stop, it's a lot easier to totally stop them than to just do it a little bit. That requires a lot more discipline. To only have one drink or to only eat that one piece of cake is a lot harder than to stop entirely from having cake or drinks and whatever it is. These are simple examples with alcohol or sugar, but it can be exercise, it can be sleep, going to bed earlier, it can be working out, it can be something in your work. It doesn't matter what the example is, but when you have that real clear commitment, it becomes easy. And this is why so many people, when there are hard external circumstances, such as a medical diagnosis, they're able to overnight quit smoking. They're able to overnight change the way they live and their core habits and how much sleep they get, because there's a really clear commitment, a total change in the way they see their life, in the way they see the world, in their perception. And from this total change comes really strong commitment. And I bet if you ask them a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks after they quit smoking, if it's hard, no, they don't even think about it. It's only hard because we haven't fully committed. If you fully commit, if you fully decide you're going to be healthy, or you're quitting this type of food, or you're going to be proactive in your work, or you're going to get up earlier, and you know why you fully committed, not just because it sounds cool, not just because someone else is doing it, not just because you think you should do it, because there's a real strong internal reason for you to want to change that behavioral habit. In the case of alcohol and sugar for me, or exercising, there was a really clear internal commitment. I was just super, super, super motivated. It wasn't just like, yeah, maybe it would be better. It was like, no, this is something I totally want to change in my life. And I had personal reasons for this, but there was a very strong commitment. And from that strong commitment, the first few times a bit challenging, like we said, that initial building of the habit and shifting and rewiring the behavior and routines is a bit challenging, but then it becomes easy. And this is why I say self-discipline is easy and willpower is hard, because willpower you need to use again and again. And that's because you haven't built up a principle or a standard or a rule. And self-discipline really is self-compassion for yourself, for your future self. It's a real strong love correlation with who you want to be and what you want for your future self. If you know that if you skip your morning routine, you're going to be really tired and stressed the whole day, then by doing your morning routine, you're showing appreciation for your future self. You're supporting them. If you know that if you don't do this work activity on the Friday, it will be stressful the whole weekend because you'll be thinking about it and you'll have to do it first thing Monday morning, then doing that work activity on Friday is great compassion for yourself. We often see self-discipline as self-punishing, and I think this is a false conception that comes from the fact that on the moment, it can be a bit of hard love. On the moment, it can be like, okay, let's go, let's do this run, let's do this hot task, and it can feel a bit forceful sometimes. And this is why we think of it as self-punishing. But it really, really isn't. It's self-respect, it's self-compassion. Some people say it's self-love, it's freedom. Because once you have this in place, once you're able to have that discipline in different areas of your life, it gives you the freedom of choice. It gives you more mental space. It enables you to know that you can trust yourself. When you say, I'll do this first thing Monday morning, you know that by Monday lunch it will be done because you're the sort of person who does what they say they're going to do to yourself and you believe it. Whew. From that comes a lot of relief, a lot of freedom, a lot of joy from knowing that you can trust your own word. And this is where the self-trust component comes in. And it really is where also you feel joy for knowing that you can follow through on your commitments. And like I said, this is something you build. I wasn't initially that self-disciplined in certain areas of my life, such as exercising and getting up. And then I shifted it. And now I know that if I do commit to getting up an XYZ time or to working out or whatever it is, I know I will follow through with it. And this means it makes my life a lot easier. But first, you need to decide what are those rules and principles you actually want to put in place. Why does it matter? Because if you don't know why it matters, if it's just, well, everyone out there seems to be going to the gym 5 times a week, maybe I need to also do that and go to CrossFit. Maybe not. Maybe go swimming or dancing or running or Pilates. You don't need to go to the gym. But once you know what you really want to do and why you really want to do it, then it's easy. And I feel that so often we think that self-discipline is hard because we haven't really paused and really strengthened that core why and that core commitment. Finding what are those rules and principles and why they're so important, that can be a bit challenging. But once you've got that in place, actually then following through with it, if it's really deep and really anchored, it does get easy. And we want to start small. So if you're someone that is eating, sugar twice a day for forever, go down to once a day and then go down to maybe max once a week and then whatever. But you decide your own rules. That's the other thing. Like, don't let anybody dictate your rules. Don't listen to this, think, oh, she doesn't drink alcohol and sugar, maybe I should stop. Good idea if you value your health, but maybe not. Maybe you value, socializing and having your drink every Saturday more, and that's fine. But it's being clear with yourself. What are your core rules? What are your core principles? Why do they matter? How do they impact your life? And for this, we need a ton of awareness. We need to be really aware of what are your values, really aware of what are your go-to behaviors and patterns, really aware of what are your goals and what's important for you. Because if you're not aware of all of this, we'll just get influenced by everything around us, by environment, by what people say, by watching a podcast, by listening to others. And for me, for instance, I noticed that if I listen to certain business owners, people like Alex Hormozi, that are really, really like grinders and hustlers in their approach, love his content. I got a lot of value from a lot of the things he shares. Personally, I don't believe in just overly hustling, working day and night, around the clock, every weekend. I believe in being highly effective in the work you do in the time frame you decide, and then equally enjoying your personal life and carving out a lot of free time also. I don't believe in working weekends. These are all personal standards. That doesn't mean it's good or it's bad to work weekends or not work weekends. Different people, different rules, different standards. But it's so important once you know that, then I can listen, for instance, to Alex Hormozi or other people who I feel are the sort of people who get a kick from working a ton of hours. And I can get a lot of value from the other content, from what he shares about sales or marketing or lead generation. All of these things get a lot of value and apply in my own life without being so influenced that I start to shift my own standards to working around the clock. And that's the same for you. If you've decided your rules, your standards, your principles, then you might listen to someone, feel that there are one or two things where you don't totally agree with their perspective. Maybe you're listening to this, for example, and you're thinking, I don't know, I don't want to quit cake for like, well, then don't, right? But then think, okay, but what are some areas where I want to have more self-discipline, or what are some principles I can put in place, and what is my minimum in these areas? And then how can I begin the next day? Once you're really clear on the areas, on where you want to have more self-discipline and what that looks like, you build these small habits and practices in place. And it's so easy once you have that really crystal clear in your mind, and you generally have also self-compassion for your future self. Because then you'll start to see that the actions you take pay off. You'll start to notice that you have that great morning routine, or you do that proactive work, and then you get the results. And then it becomes so much easier as you go along, because you start to see proof that when you show up, you get it back. And also, and this is definitely something that happened to me, the times you suddenly make exceptions, maybe once in a blue moon, you think, oh, that was fine. And maybe other times you think, oh, wow, I do feel a lot better when I have my morning routine. Or I really don't feel great when I procrastinate, or it really doesn't feel great. And then you'll go back to your new standard, which is being proactive, which is having this great morning routine, which is exercising, because that becomes your new standard. One thing to keep in mind as you shift this and as you build your self-discipline is obviously the notion of identity and how you see yourself, because as long as you see yourself from your past version of yourself, your past light, you will find it harder to build the self-discipline towards this new person. So if you see yourself as a procrastinator or someone who's lazy, for instance, then it will be challenging to suddenly be more proactive in your work or take ownership. So the identity work happens at the same time. When I spoke about that core commitment, strong why, and being really clear on why you're going to do something, why it matters, it also links with building this new identity of who you want to become in the process. Do you want to be the sort of person who gets up at 10 a.m. or do you want to be the sort of person who gets up at 5 or at 7, whatever time? Who do you want to be? Do you want to be someone who's healthy or is kind? Or do you want to be someone who ends up missing out on their workouts, who's inconsistent? For me, when I shifted identity, I really looked at the parts in my identity that caused me the most pain. I was very upset about when I wasn't kind. The first big practice I put into place was kindness. And I read several quotes about the importance of kindness in life, and people who'd regretted at the end of their life that they hadn't been more kind. Then I made that commitment to myself, and I started to notice all the times I wasn't kind and tried to change it again or apologize, and started to notice opportunities for being kind, such as helping someone who's crying on the street, or giving something that's someone in need, or stopping and having a conversation with someone who needs to have a conversation, who's maybe a bit lonely. So I really practiced kindness proactively. That was one thing that I thought in myself, if I'm not a kind person, then what's the point? I feel like if you're not kind in life, like why? Like that's kind of the most important thing ever. So that was really the first sort of pain point if I felt I wasn't kind. And the second pain point was when I felt I wasn't consistent. And so I felt like I wasn't someone who was consistently showing up, whether it was professionally in my business or in exercise. And that caused me a lot of pain because I realized I wanted to be someone who was consistent. I wanted to have trust that when I say I'll do something, I'll do it. I wanted to be able to follow through, be disciplined and consistent. And so I just built it. And like I said, I fell up and down mostly through setting too high standards and not following through. But then once I learned to start small and build it up, and I tracked my streaks and I celebrated my wins and I worked with coaches, and then you start to really shift your behavior, and suddenly you become the sort of person who exercises every day. And it didn't really happen overnight, but it can be done. I went from someone who never, ever, ever exercised, like I'm talking never, up until about 28 years old, to someone that exercises every day. So it is absolutely possible to become more disciplined in an area of your life. And I know I speak a lot about exercise because it's an easy place to illustrate this concept, but it's the exact same thing in business. It's the exact same thing with how you show up with your team or with your clients. Anything that you notice inside causes you pain because you think, I don't want to be the sort of person who snaps. I don't want to be the sort of person who's always impatient and frustrated. I want to be calm. So my new thing now, not really new, and the one I'm working on most, and it's also what I help my clients and leaders with, is being calm. So really, I've decided that the main thing, if we're able to stay calm and grounded at all times, then we're able to lead better, to lead ourselves. It feels better. So this is the thing I'm working on continuously and checking in with myself. Can I stay calm? Can I stay calm in this situation? How can I stay calm in this situation? Breathe, pause, stay calm, come back to calm. What can help me to stay calm? And this came from the fact that I almost burnt out several times. I did another episode on how to prevent burnout. I was lucky that I managed to avoid it, but I was close to burnout a couple of times. And from there, I decided, okay, really the highest priority of all is the ability to stay calm and stay grounded at all times. And from there, I can take more coherent action. I can be more present for my clients. I can be more present for my friends and family. And this is really the most important thing for me at the moment. So it's the same in your case. When you think of your self-discipline, what are some of your core values and virtues and principle things that are really important for you? And then what actions, what behaviors do you need to do? What are your minimum standards? Don't skip 2 days twice. Track your progress as you go, and maybe have some form of accountability, whether it's a coach or a friend or a way of keeping accountability in some way. For more sort of virtues, like I said, around kindness or being calm, these things are a bit harder to track. I just sort of check in with myself at the end of the day and ask myself, how do I feel I progressed on this? But for things that are more measurable, like sleep and eating and most important task at work and exercising, these are things that you can really measure and see how you made progress on. And I do guarantee it gets a lot easier. And the good news, the caveat here, is that once you're disciplined in one area, you can transpose it to other areas. And then once you're multiply self-disciplined and maybe 1 or 2 areas you're less, you can put all your attention on that and really learn how to be more disciplined in those areas and what's happening there. And so initially, if there's multiple areas where you feel you don't have the self-discipline, the habits, the practices you want, it can be a bit of a challenge. But as it grows, it becomes easier because you're building that muscle of self-discipline, of focus, of clarity, of purpose, of motivation. And all of these things can then help you in the different areas. My name is Katie Stoddard. I'm conscious leadership and high performance coach, speaker, and podcaster. I hope today's episode has been useful for you. Please be below a comment telling me what you take away from this. Do you feel that you're able to have that self-discipline? What do you feel is missing? Maybe what else you would like to learn about it. I will answer each and every comment myself. I do guarantee that along the way, it does get easier. It's absolutely possible to build your self-discipline. It's a habit, it's a muscle, it's a practice, and it becomes easier because you've made the decision ahead of time, and then you don't need to make that decision again, and you just fully commit and you do what you said you were going to do, and it builds up and it gets easier as you go along. If you're new to the show, please subscribe and see you in the next episode.